Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar, part of the Tech Talk X series by Digital at INSEAD. The series is dedicated to exploring new digital technologies, their application, as well as their impact on management, business, and society overall. I'm Peter Zemsky, Eli Lilly Chaired Professor of Strategy and Innovation at INSEAD, coming to you today live from Dubai. Let me quickly do some webinar etiquette, housekeeping. As you listen, please post your questions for our guests using the Q&A tab. Keep them short and sharp. To help me prioritize what to ask, you can vote up some of the submitted questions. We're not using audience chat or audio today. And as you notice, the webinar is being recorded. All right, so the topic we're going to dive into is a popular one today. How do you really drive business and social value from AI technologies? What makes this talk distinctive in our series is we're really going to focus on innovation ecosystems. We know that collaboration has been a really key part of tech strategies, and that's especially true for AI, as we'll explore. We're going to go inside one of the central players in AI, Microsoft, with two alums who have really front row seats in both how Microsoft manages its innovation ecosystem and how it has had to transform its organization for an age of AI. So first speaker will be Dean Carignan, MBA, INSEAD 03. He's in the office of the chief scientist at Microsoft, so really important boundary spanning department and role. And he's also going to share insights from his forthcoming book, The Insider's Guide to Innovation at Microsoft. And here you can see some of what that's going to be coming out in 2025. In addition, Siddartha Chaturvedi, MBA 15D, product manager at Microsoft, is going to offer his perspectives on really those boundary spanning innovations that Microsoft is pursuing today. Dean, Sid, welcome to Tech Talk X. Come on out. Okay, why don't we start with you, Dean? So tell us about your current role at Microsoft in your own words, and really start to highlight some of the ways that you're working across organizational boundaries.
Yeah, perfect. So the Office of the Chief Scientist at Microsoft was created in 2020. It was kind of created in a recognition that computer science is increasingly influencing the way all other science gets done. And we need to have at the company a senior scientist who just thinks deeply about that. My manager at the time, Eric Horvitz, was asked to take on this role. He asked me to move with him. It was a pretty easy decision to make. I would say that it has been a completely boundary spanning role, to use your term, Peter. We work across the whole company. We also work upstream into academia and downstream into the chief scientists at our customers and partners. So it really is an integrative role where we try to pull together various players to drive innovation. I would say that the single most important thing for me in fulfilling that mission is sort of in networking and building relationships. The thing we've found is that innovation really has to be a team sport. It has to cross disciplines. And you only do that effectively when you've built trust in advance of the innovation that you're trying to drive. So a huge amount of my time goes into anticipating who do I need to connect with, how do I build trust, rapport, understand their business. And if I were to highlight one practice that I personally use, that would be it.
Nice. Hey, did you guys, the recent Nobel Prizes, did you feel some validation for what you were doing?
I think that was exactly the kind of acknowledgement that these sciences are converging and that you can't actually do any of the hard sciences without doing computer science and AI. So 100% agree with that.
All right. Sid, tell us a bit about your role and all the boundary spanning you have to do.
No, thank you so much for having me. And I'm a director of product management within our strategic missions and technology space. So just to sort of sum it up, we look at early incubations, predominantly all the patents that we hold, all the work that we're doing in Microsoft Research, and turn it into business. Sometimes we have to work across multiple research teams, sometimes a single research team, and external collaborators. So, for example, right now I'm collaborating with a team that has epidemiologists, entomologists, roboticists, designers, and then I have to interface with other parts of Microsoft like finance, marketing, Dean's group, because Dean holds us responsible. So that's kind of where the I would say two things come in handy from my INSEAD time. The first one is the value chain mapping, which I learned in your class, Peter. And the second one was all the OB courses and the negotiation courses that you took. They come in handy every day.
Very nice. And you're referring to Dean's role on the responsible AI side?
That is correct. So Dean and Dean's team leads a committee. Either I'll let him talk about it, but that holds all of the engineering groups responsible as we innovate. So it's the fine balance between move fast, break things while doing it in a responsible way.
Don't break
Maybe
the wrong things, I guess.
Could I go there for just one minute, Peter, just to frame it? Yeah, so part of one program out of the Office of the Chief Scientist is Ether, and thanks to Sid for teeing it up. It stands for, it's a mouthful, but it stands for AI Ethics and Effects in Research and Engineering. It's a boundary spanning committee that we set up all the way back in 2016 because we realized that AI was going to start to move faster. And as it moves faster, we wanted to ensure that it would move safer. And so we've been working on this for almost a decade. And I think we'll get into some of the details, but that is a real central part of the mission of this broader office that I'm a part of.
Maybe you could, okay, where to begin, right? We have to unpack all these connections, but why don't we start with the co-innovation piece and maybe just get some examples on the table. So, why is co-innovation so important for innovations built on AI? And really maybe Sid, if you mentioned some of that drug stuff that your discovery you're working on, could you sort of just make it concrete for us, how that
Absolutely. Goes? So co-innovation is important because, again, when you map out the value chain, there is a problem. If we do it in isolation, we accelerate something, but we create a blockage in something else. A good example of this is we have, I think, about 40 companies right now that are focused on drug discovery, which is extremely important, and we want that to happen. So our focus was, okay, if this is successful, then what is the blue ocean that we can find where nobody's focused on right now, which was biosafety and biosecurity. So the reason for that being important was we talked to not just pharma companies, but also the regulatory bodies. And we said, okay, now if all these pharma companies start sending you more and more drugs for FDA approval, for example, what will you do with it? And the FDA said one very simple thing. The risk of our failure is really high. So we kind of cannot accelerate the approval process. And then the commercial ecosystem would be like, our approval process has slowed down even further. So somebody needs to look at the biosafety layer. And the second thing is, we're still in early days of AI-driven drug discovery. So it's really good at certain things. What we realized through our experimentation was that it is really bad at off-target toxicity. So that's the problem that we took. We partnered with some academic institutions. We partnered with some folks who had previous experience to really help AI be more effective. So if it's going to fail early within the in silico discovery space. So that was one part of it. And the second part of it was, what does this even mean from the perspective of collaboration and partnership? So all of a sudden, you have these agencies, you have these ecosystems of academic institutions that have a lot of know-how that can now be monetized in a different way because they're helping reduce the computational costs that a pharma company has to undertake, potentially helping them focus and refocus their energies on something better. So there's a business model aspect of it, there's a technology aspect of it, and mostly these two things have to come together.
Anyway, one of the key things that strikes me as you describe this is, part of the frustration with these new technologies is just because part of an ecosystem moves fast, just because drug discovery gets fast, if the rest of the institutions aren't moving, you don't get the full benefit. Especially in that space, the public sector. I remind, we know from COVID that they did amazing things to work closely with industry to get things approved. But can we really institutionalize that? So fascinating. Let's swing over. Let's get Dean's experience. Same question, maybe a different kind of example of co-innovation.
Yeah, and 100% agree with Sid's point about understanding the value chain. And we used to see almost this waterfall effect with innovation. It would start upstream, maybe in a scientific or an engineering breakthrough, and it would work its way through to the customers. Everything's moving so fast now, and the potential to get blocked at any stage is so high that you just have to have these collaborations ongoing. And so the example that for me is really resonant is when a couple of years ago, Microsoft made the decision that we would launch the GPT-4 model, which at the time was a huge step change in terms of the power of AI, and that we would launch it first in Bing. We brought the entire company together into a massive virtual team to make sure that we could do that effectively, but to also do it safely. And so what you had was upstream researchers who were experts in certain areas of AI safety, working day in, day out with user-facing and customer-facing people from the Bing business who are literally flighting things with customers and getting user feedback and sending it back up the chain to the researchers so we could make the models and the underlying tech work better. And we ran this for probably 6 months before we felt we were in a position that we can really integrate the new AI technology effectively in a way that benefits users and safely. And we're still seeing the benefits of it because new research directions were launched that are still ongoing and generating new insight and new breakthroughs. And the people that face the customers, those teams have a deeper appreciation of the research and kind of the underlying science of AI. So we've created this community of interest that now works much more quickly and effectively together. But it kind of came through that catalytic moment of the whole company saying, we're going to launch this thing, we're going to do it safely, and it's going to be everyone's priority for 6 months.
Oh, so just to go a bit deeper, I'm interested for both of you. Well, how do you actually build an organization that can do that? So that's both, I think in your examples, coordinating well inside. And again, there's this huge tendency for big organizations to have silos, and then also in Sid, in your case, to coordinate into academia and stuff. Maybe I'll stick with you for a bit, Sid. So before you were in your current role, you spent a lot of time in Microsoft research. What's why don't you start with the role of Microsoft research and making some of that happen?
Yeah, that's a great one. We wrote a whole case study on Microsoft research in the book because it's so important. And I think so Microsoft Research is a group of about 1,500 PhD researchers who work full time trying to anticipate where the technology is going and how we get in front of it. And it kind of cracked a classic problem of industrial research labs, where most industrial research labs come up with great ideas. They advance the scientific thinking. It never gets out of the laboratory. There's a handful that have cracked the code. But probably the single biggest secret with Microsoft Research was the type of people that they hire. And by design, from the very earliest days when it was set up in 1991, the goal, in fact, my boss who ran Microsoft Research said he always looked for people with horsepower and rudder was his terminology. Intellectual horsepower to be some of the best scientists and researchers in the world, but rudder to direct that insight and knowledge and advances to a specific outcome, that benefits the company and its customers. And as with a lot of cultural hiring strategies, once you get the core of people that have that combination of skills, you attract more of them. And even today, you can walk around Microsoft Research and you see kind of that ethos and culture that's there. The other thing, just, very practically, is it is far from an ivory tower. Microsoft Research has a series, in fact, there's a whole team dedicated to connecting the researchers with the rest of the company, doing workshops, seminars, sharing out where the research is going. And as you do that over time, you build shared vocabulary, you build shared understanding across what the research can do and what the product teams need it to do. Sid, in fact, is kind of one of the best product team bridgers, into Microsoft research. So it's a very different approach to an industrial research lab, and it's really paid dividends over the years.
Great, thank you. So super interesting. Again, I like, oftentimes building that coordination muscle comes down to things like seminars and conversations, and that's a big piece of it. Sid, maybe push you a little bit. How do you sort of work with your partners to also build their capabilities, including, I guess you do a fair amount of work with the public sector. That could be challenging.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And thank you, Dean. I do want to acknowledge gratitude for making it easier for us to collaborate. I think one of the things that was set up, at least in Microsoft Research before I go into the public sector, was not just the horsepower and rudder. Generally speaking, people want to learn. And the research mindset is one of, oh, if I'm wrong, that's okay, because I will build something that will be right. And it's a very different, it's a very enriching environment to be in, because you don't feel worried about pushing back. Now, within the public sector domain, it's slightly different. You have to be a little more nuanced in the communication. And if I could, I think this is the best place that I've used generative AI extensively. So about 3 years ago, I was one of the few people who got early access to GPT 3.5 before the ChatGPT launch, just to test it out and see what it's doing. And one of the things that we realized was, even though it was really bad at that point of time at content ideation, like humans still had to do it, what it was really good, even in those early days, was translating one language to another. Still in English, but translating from finance to marketing, translating from sales to regulation. So that was the use case that we built for ourselves. And we kind of always gave it prompts like, hey, how would somebody perceive this? Like if I was sending an email, act like, and you would have seen those prompts now, act like XYZ, what would you do? So I think a large part of the successes are driven by being innately curious about what is the value that you're creating for the end user. Like nobody cares about the technology. Honestly speaking, we do, but outside, nobody cares about the technology. They care about outcomes. So the faster you can translate that to outcomes or translate that to a value creation ecosystem, they will start listening to you. Now, internally, we have to then figure out how do you do value capture. That's a separate story. But that's kind of where I think working across disciplines, translating into their language, and being cognizant about their incentives and their drivers is very important.
So just to pause there, we're going to do the public sector. Just encourage people to put questions in. So David has already asked a question you guys started to touch on. I don't know if you have the Q&A open, but he's really asking, tell us more about the rudder. So we get the research side, the curiosity, but what does it really mean to have that rudder where you connect the science, the innovation to the customer needs? Now you started on that. I'll just flag it. You want to jump in on that?
Yeah, I'd love to. And there's one other thing just on research, and then I'll go to rudder. But I realize that not every company has a Microsoft research. Not everyone has the luxury of having 1,500 PhDs. But the same model can apply to academic collaborations. And so I encourage everyone to think about whether or not it's a captive, research capability in your company, or just a local university that you may have access to. Google did something very smart, I think. They basically looked around at the researchers in academia that were doing interesting work. They put together a pool of funds where they essentially buy 20% of their time. I think they're called Google Scholars or something. And so they have access to those folks in academia. So there's many models for kind of tapping into, those those minds that are out there thinking. And there's a great book called Pastor's Quadrant, which takes all of research, it boils it down into 3 categories. It says there's basic research, which is just advancing our knowledge, and that's usually what happens at universities. There's applied research, which is just trying to make things work better, which is usually what happens in corporations. And then there's this top right quadrant, which is called use-inspired basic research. So it's making big bets and advancing our scientific knowledge, but based on needs. And that is the sweet spot for any company that really wants to do disruptive innovation. And the source of the science there can be anywhere. It doesn't have to be inside your own company. But that quadrant and kind of finding ways to people who have, in this case, both the horsepower and the rudder, is, I think, just a great direction that anyone in any company can go in.
Maybe Sid, I mean, sitting in product, right? You're supposed to be good on rudder.
Making money.
Any thoughts on how you link all this up with those market needs effectively?
Absolutely. So I think what Dean said is kind of important, because if you're in an applied research ecosystem, you can change the application. So you might have an underpinning technology that's great, but when I was working with the US federal government, like for Microsoft, we did not hypothesize. We just built out 130 use cases, and we said, okay, let's see who resonates with
AI use cases. Is that right?
AI use cases, yeah. And all of those were built with putting our product at the core, which was the Azure OpenAI service. But then you had to link up other services, because like I said, nobody cares about the technology, they care about the outcomes. And then there is a value differential between the cost of the technology and the cost of the outcome in the state of the art. So we always do that. Just to sort of take a different example with Microsoft Premonition, which is like a really cool technology. It understands and it lures mosquitoes. It stores the mosquitoes, takes the blood from inside the mosquitoes, and does a genomic sampling and tells you what kind of disease might there be in the ecosystem. To achieve that, we built a really robust metagenomics pipeline. That was one of the technologies. When we started going out to public health ecosystems, they were moving slow. They were also not the best funded. This is also, funnily enough, before and after the pandemic, there's been a dearth of public funding for public health. Go figure. But the reality was the problem that we were trying to solve was sometimes in the hardest places to afford it. So, for example, we are solving it in Nepal, and if you're bringing a breakthrough technology to sort of the global south, it's really hard to monetize it. And that's where the partnerships sort of started to work out. We said, okay, what is the way that we can rethink the business model and our interaction and do a rev share model that allows us to take a little bit of risk, offset the risk from the customer, but allows long-term value creation. So what we did over there was we said, we are going to put this up at a heavily discounted price. You are going to own the data of all the mosquitoes that come in, and we will help you monetize that data by selling it to academic research for the diseases that are in Nepal. And that way, when you get the value out of it, you can pay us the money, and there's a cliff. So once we sort of recoup our investment, the rest of the revenue stream is yours. So a lot of intelligent reconfiguration of finances and business models needs to happen for these models to come out, because I'm happy to go deeper into this, but we moved from a world of managed infrastructure to managed services to now managed intelligence. And the business models that worked here will not work here. We have to fundamentally shift because somebody called this, I said the accountability, somebody called it suability. So what can I sue a tech company for has changed completely. So we were accountable for selling hardware and a software bundle onto that. Then we were accountable for making sure the hardware was safe and was available. Then we were we had SLAs that said that you will get this quality of service. And now with managed intelligence, we are saying you will get the answer. So the entire business model has shifted drastically, and we need to adapt both business and technology together.
Anyway, just
And
as your
Peter,
former.
can I build on that for just one second?
Yeah,
Yeah.
please.
I feel like I'm back in INSEAD. I'm building on Sid's comment in the in the classroom, but there's just this framework that has stuck with me throughout my career. It's really simple, but it's useful. It's BXT. And if you're going to invest in anything, there needs to be a business proposition. The experience has to be clear. It has to be useful to users. They have to want to use it, and the technology has to be there. And interestingly, that came up in Microsoft way before AI. It actually started with Xbox, back in 2000, where they said, we won't invest in anything where you haven't described B, X, and T. And it's simple, but it's useful. And anytime you're getting too fascinated with one aspect of that, you just bring the triad in and make sure you're looking at all three.
We've got some great questions coming in, so I'll do a few more, but I definitely want to start shifting over. But maybe you guys are doing fascinating things. Maybe Sid first. How did you get into the current role coming out of INSEAD? Almost 10 years. How did that happen?
Yeah, I feel old. Yeah, so I think it was, and I have to put this down to one single alum who helped me out, which was Majid Al-Zain. He's still at Microsoft. He's a 13D. Just to give context, I wasn't even looking at Microsoft per se because Satya had just become the CEO. So he had done not a lot. He was promising, but it was more like, oh, I want to be in a cool tech company. Let me figure that out. And Majid came on campus and he said, things are changing. You should give it a shot. And I said, hey, listen, I'm happy to, but let's think about it. And then, like, fast forward, I had a few interviews. The people I met were great. And the first job that I got had nothing to do with what I'm doing today, which was predominantly the UK data center rollout. So we were working on rolling out data centers at that point of time. My job was to make sure we had enough people who would consume the data center capacity so that we justify our investment. And that led me to doing stretch projects, and through the connections of both the MBA community within Microsoft and the INSEAD ecosystem, allowed me to potentially slowly make my way back into healthcare. And Dean and his group played a very strong part because Dean's boss actually funded one of the projects that I did, which was Biomed Search. So we worked with Haifeng. He was a researcher. I said, there is a need for this during COVID. I reached out to Dean. Dean pitched it to Eric. Eric was on NIH. It all just kind of worked out. So we were able to get these stretch projects underway, which allowed me to demonstrate my curiosity and my ability within that ecosystem, because I have 0 healthcare degrees. And then I moved back into healthcare.
Dean, same for you. A little bit how you got here, but also maybe in your case, what led you to write this forthcoming book?
Yeah, curiosity, I think, is similar to Sid, is that my driving sort of force. I worked at McKinsey before INSEAD, and I loved being exposed to like client problems and challenges, and I just assumed I would do INSEAD and I would go back to consulting. But INSEAD alumnus at Microsoft reached out to me, had a strategy role, said, look, you can do the same strategy without all the travel. And you'll have, more kind of focus and ability to do more of the implementation here.
Having been at McKinsey, you knew the benefit of that.
I was sold very quickly on that. Exactly. Same intellectual challenge, less travel, and so from there, so it really was, what I would always do is I would be curious about an adjacent function at Microsoft. I would start working with people in that function, and then I would move into that function. So the path was strategy, and as strategy was becoming more data oriented, I moved into data science. From data science, I could see AI on the horizon, and Microsoft Research had just created a lab to focus on AI. And so I was able to move into that lab. Again, as an engineer working among researchers, so boundary spanning. And I was in that lab for, I think, 3 to 4 years. And that was the point at which they decided to create. I was working for Eric Orbitz. Eric was asked to become the chief scientist, and he asked me to join. And I was at that point. It's always been sort of 3 years in a role, and I'm ready for a new challenge. And so I moved with him. So I'd love to say it was pre-planned, and there was this huge timeline in my mind, but it was being curious and kind of moving opportunistically when ideas or opportunities presented themselves.
Right, right. Hopefully people find that useful. Yeah, really driven by the curiosity. Yeah, tell us about the decision to write the book.
Yeah, great. So one of the things we've seen within Microsoft is that AI is resulting in the pace of change just accelerating, probably in an unprecedented way, unlike anything else that we've seen in history. And we realized there needed to be a playbook for how not just teams at Microsoft, but in any company or any organization could innovate. And we looked at Microsoft and we said, here's a company that has innovated for 50 years, or next year will be the 50th anniversary of the founding of the company, has fundamentally reinvented itself 4 times now as the computing paradigms have shifted. And even at the age of 50 continues to demonstrate this agility and a kind of ability to recreate itself. So we thought, what better place to actually study innovation? And because my co-author and I are both insiders, we have access. And originally we just thought we would write some case studies that would be useful within Microsoft. But as we did the research, we realized this has almost nothing to do with the underlying technology and everything to do with how you manage a team, you build a culture, you encourage risk-taking. And that was the point at which we realized this is a business book. It's not a technology book. It's not a Microsoft book. It's a book about innovation that has a really specific focus in terms of the research. So that was how it came to be.
Look forward to getting my hands on that. I want to pick up, maybe I'm about to go to the audience questions for the second half, but I want to pick up on what you said. This is the 4th transformation of Microsoft. So Sid, as your former faculty, I'll put you on the spot. So you've been there almost a decade. You've seen sort of front and center some of this transformation. Maybe you can kick off with just a few thoughts on what does it mean to transform a big organization for an age of AI? And then Dean, who is the author on the topic, will come to you. But Sid, why don't you kick off?
Sure. I think what Dean, I wish I had a better answer, but Dean kind of summarized it. It's about how you manage teams. And a lot of teams at Microsoft are not formal. They are we teams. So there are times where you will be managing somebody who's way more senior to you. But what you have to get them to buy in onto the vision that you want to execute on. And this has happened multiple times. This has happened actually 3 times to me. Biomed Search was one of the examples. I had an ally who helped me sell the vision. So it comes down to really thinking through a different book, which was a risk-driven business model, but really coming down to understanding the alignment of the incentives. And if you're able to align the incentives of people and you're able to speak their language, there's a higher probability that you will be successful. One of the things is you have to understand the core metrics of Microsoft and translate that back continuously. So if I'm going to affect 100,000 people and reduce the cost of diagnosis by X amount, why should we care as Microsoft? Now, that is a very different proposition than thinking about why the customer would care. So it's the value capture bit that has to be crystal clear. And that could be brand equity, that could be revenue, that could be thought leadership, that could be a bunch of variety of levers. But I think if you're able to translate that back into the leaders, we have a bunch of really smart leaders who may or may not care about something, but it's your job to figure out what they care about and translate it back in a language that they understand.
Dean, just one additional point on the transformation that's required.
Yeah. I think one thing that leaders at Microsoft have done well is they've read and internalized the book The Innovator's Dilemma, which really captures why big companies fail to respond to changes in the environment, even when it's obvious that it's coming. And I think to telescope into that, the most important thing is also if the company is composed of hard systems and soft systems. Hard systems are organizational charts, reporting lines, policy protocol. But a lot of what keeps a company focused and dictates actions is just the culture, what it values, what it celebrates, what it rewards. And so to really affect a transformation, you have to change both the hard and the soft systems. And the soft is often the harder, the more challenging, because it's not written down. Culture is not, defined formally. And so it's really getting leaders who embody the change and champion it and kind of are relentless in driving it down into the soft systems as well as the hard systems.
All right, so now I'm going to channel the audience questions. I'm going to push you guys on their behalf. And I think let's talk about the ethical side. So a number of questions on that. But again, it's an important part of the transformation of companies today, right? So clearly we're at a moment where you have to recognize that technology can be good or bad for society. And AI raises lots of those issues. So I guess people are asking, like, Omar, what are the measures Microsoft is actually taking to ensure alignment of these innovations with ethical codes? Again, probably hard and soft, such as the Tay chatbot. And then what was another one? Yeah, this is kind of nice. Same thing. To what extent do you work with other big tech companies, right? To what extent is this a collective effort? So in that ecosystem around ethics. So I guess maybe Dean, you run the so how does that work?
Again, I'm a fan of mental models that simplify things, and so we think of when we think about safe and responsible AI, the governing model is every time a new AI capability comes, we want to do three things. We want to identify risks, we want to quantitatively measure the risks, and we want to mitigate the risks. And even though that seems kind of obvious, the fact that every time, for example, a new model comes in from OpenAI, we run that playbook and we actually have scorecards with, rows that are risks and columns that are measures. And there's a ton of information that Microsoft has published on this. In fact, I can send links later. But having that playbook is super important. And then the other thing that we've noticed is we almost insert a fourth motion in there, which is updating policy. And that's been the hardest part, because policy used to be this durable thing. You write a policy about what you will and won't do with your technology, what's allowed, what's not allowed, and you expect it to get a couple of years of longevity before an update. Now, every time a new capability comes, you have to kind of reassess, does our policy cover it? Do we need a new section or clause? So iteratively running that cycle every time a new model or capability
give a flavor for that. Could you illustrate a little bit this need to update policies? Where does that come up, just to make it concrete for people?
Yeah, a good example is when we went from GPT-3 to GPT-4. GPT-3, most of the risks were, it could say things that were a little toxic, a little biased, not, but when you get to GPT-4, it could be used for misinformation. It could give you insight on how to create, toxic substances and things. And so we had to run that cycle multiple times to tease out and identify the new harms, create new mechanisms to measure them, because it's not a simple one-size-fits-all metric, and then roll them up, into our policy. And so when there's a step change like that, the capabilities change, the risks change, and so you've got to make sure you reflect that in every aspect of how you are managing risk.
Very nice. And then the last piece, to what extent do you coordinate beyond obviously just running that in Microsoft sounds like a handful, but what's going on more broadly?
Yeah, Thankfully, there's enough focus on responsible AI that there are actually formal institutions that have been set up. 18 months ago, we made a set of commitments to the White House of things we would commit to do as a company. One of them was participating in something called the Frontier Model Forum, FMF, which has ourselves, Google, OpenAI, Anthropic, Meta. And so that's a group that comes together regularly. We share, information on what risks are we seeing. A lot of our mitigations and our safeguards end up getting open sourced. So, the idea is let's get them out there so we have a sort of collective commons that we can all use.
Right.
And so that would be an example of where I think we're coming together both as leadership and then contributing actual technical assets to try to just make the whole industry safer.
Well, and so Sid, just, you're out there at the frontier creating value in the market with your partners. And how does the ethical thing, how do you live that? What's the experience like?
So I think we've dealt with cybersecurity risks for a very, very long time. And the model is not that drastically different. You start off with zero trust, and you say that whatever we build will be used for harm. You assume that, and then you try to create harm, and are like, okay, how do we protect from this harm? So that's effectively what rapid red teaming is, and we do it for almost all of our products. And once we figure out that there is a systemic way of exploiting, either we work with the broader ecosystem to fill in that. So I'll give you a very tangible example. One of the things that we were working on, the reason why I switched from public health to biosafety as the key insight was that with large language models, one of the ways that governments used to audit these pharma companies was chemical reagents. So how many chemical reagents were sold or were available is the same with morphine and hospitals. So if you have in silico drug discovery, which means that you can delay the amount of chemicals used, means the decision of what you're building cannot be sort of gleaned from the chemicals that are being consumed by a company, means that there needs to be an additional layer of security. So there is the predominant physical security layer, which is our data centers take care of that. The second layer is cybersecurity, which is like, are the people who are authorized to work on this working on this? But the third layer, which is becoming increasingly important as we build managed intelligence, is functional security. So for me, building biosecurity becomes very important. So the outcome of that responsible AI sort of thought process was, if we want AI to be successful within the bio and life sciences, and those Nobel Prizes that we won come to fruition in the real world, we need something new which does not exist today. And that's why we build that. So I think it's similar to the ethos of what cybersecurity was. Start with zero trust, assume your technology will create harm, and work with user experience researchers, which is very different from UI researchers. So just want to say that and call that out. We work extensively with UX researchers, both in-house and external, and we try to deploy them in some of the hardest places. So with premonition, the first two places that we deployed were Africa and Nepal. They were not places that were conducive. So when people are like, oh, try the low-hanging fruit, we did the opposite. And I don't think that was like, in essence, the best way to do it, but it gave us a lot of learnings, and we definitely now try to do it in one easy and one really hard place, but that's kind of where I would go.
So that's good. Actually, you're already responding to what I wanted to do. So some of the questions are pushing us to not just think about the harm, but how do we get the best out of the technology? So for instance, you said you've already touched on this a little bit, access. Is this going to accelerate digital divides and inequalities, or to what extent can Microsoft and other companies get this into underserved markets? And then just in general, maybe Dean first, a little bit, how you think about sort of a rudder that's going to lead this to have some of these pro-social impacts.
Yeah, I like, so a kind of the term we like to use is human-centered AI. A lot of AI starts with the question, what can AI do? We prefer to start with the question, what should AI do? And by starting with that question, you're going to build safer AI and also more useful AI. So that idea of starting with the what should it do is pretty central. The other thing is organizationally, we have sort of two groups. We have Ether, which is focused on preventing harms, and then we have AI for good, which is focused on generating the maximum outcome. And then obviously people throughout the company like Sid work on various projects, but we definitely have two centers of excellence focused on prevent the harms, maximize the good. I think there's also, we're fortunate, there's just this, culture at Microsoft that our whole mission is to help, everyone on the planet to achieve more. And we really, I feel that we do live that mission. And so that sort of helps us to push into the directions that are going to be more beneficial.
Sid, maybe a little bit on your side from what you're seeing on the ground about the ability to get these technologies into emerging markets.
So I think there are two parts. The first part is there's disparities even in developed markets, and we worked with some of the folks on Microsoft Research. One lady comes to mind, Mary Gray. She is an anthropologist, and she personally mentored me for a bit, which is the reason why thinking about that is now a second habit. But when you think about disparities in healthcare, there were massive disparities just because of data sets, and now there's a fine balance. If we preclude people from putting their data in, guess what's going to happen in the academic ecosystem? They're going to train the models on the data that's available to them. And if these models start working asymmetrically better for one ecosystem, then what you kind of end up doing is you kind of creating an exacerbation of the disparity because it's an enabler. So there's a couple of things that we do. The first one is the AI for Good ecosystem led by Juan La Vista, which has AI for Health, AI for Earth, so on and so forth, where we focus on bringing that data science experience to ecosystems that might be lacking that. And it's not just about solving problems, but also skilling people that can take it forward. So with AI for Health, just because I was part of building that, I know we have roughly 200 plus grantees across 150 countries. So that's kind of one of the things that we did was we skilled the people so that it's not just like a short project, it's a longer term thing. The second one, I think, is more nuanced. It's as a product leader, you are always going to have a bias about things that you care about. So for me, it's about social disparity within women's health. That was something that I care deeply about. So you need to find people who are sensitive to certain ecosystems and become champions of it. And that's how you build a product that is, and that's why diversity is important. That's why neurodiversity is important, but also the diversity of lived experiences is important. So you need to talk to more people. You need to care about things. You need to build a notion of empathy. And structurally, Microsoft can only do so much. Like you just have to be hiring the right people. Like Dean said, in Microsoft Research, we used to try to hire a particular kind of people. And it comes down to the people at that point of time. So that's a harder thing to justify or rationalize because there's no structural integrity around it. But yeah, people will care about things that they care deeply about, and they use the enterprise to solve those problems.
All right, I'm juggling so many great questions from the audience, but here's a theme. I think we're going to double click on that human-centric AI that you talked about. So people are asking about, okay, what kind of jobs and stuff is coming. Some people are also asking about de-skilling. Is this, as it gets so good at certain creative tasks and innovation, is that going to make humans weaker? And just to put the stakes out there a little bit, I talked about Nobel Prizes, but the Nobel Prize in economics this year, one of the key winners was this guy, Darren Acemoglu. And if you know his work, he's been really tough on AI, and it's sort of saying that big tech companies are obsessed with substituting people instead of complementing people. So there's definitely some big things at play in this area of what kind of world are we creating for ourselves and our kids. So Dean, I'm going to put you on the spot on that one.
Yeah, it's a great question. As you know, father of two kids, 11 and 6 years old, I think about this constantly. So there's a couple of thoughts. One is we had an intern last summer who worked on a paper on this about how do you approach AI innovation? And one of the challenges is companies tend to invest in things that are measurable. Cost cutting is measurable. And so if you can bring AI in and you can eliminate a certain number of jobs, it's very easy to calculate the impact on the P&L. So one of the things that people do need to become more creative at is thinking, what are the things that people can do better, the quality improvements, the things that our customers would appreciate and value. And so having that more holistic view, I think is important. Basically, in our paper, we said you need to look at the amount of time that's spent on certain tasks, which of those tasks AI is good at, and then which of those tasks your customers would pay for if you could do them much better. So again, it's an integrative thing. You can't do it with just an AI person. So I think that's one thing that's very important. The de-skilling thing is a concern at a societal level. I think the thing that worries me the most is when AI can start to write on your behalf, the motivation to learn to become a good writer goes down. I see it with my own kids right now. The problem is learning to write is learning to think. And if you don't do one, you won't do the other. The group that I think is the most advanced in approaching this is Khan Academy. And they've got an entire program called Khanmigo, which is bringing AI into their traditional learning environments and doing it in ways that do not supplement skills building, but help it to just move faster and to be more customized. So that's the one that I worry about, is critical thinking as a capability and the tendency to maybe do less of it. But I always look back at when I was in school, there was the same concern that as soon as digital calculators were out there, nobody would learn mathematics, right? And we adapted to that by saying, well, you can use the calculator, but you're not going to have it in your exams. So I think we'll adjust as a society. I think we're in this particularly scary moment where we don't quite know how we'll adjust. But it's not like this is completely unprecedented in the history of technology, having these new capabilities.
No, I mean, I think there's reason to be optimistic, although, you know, I'd point to social media, right? So we didn't navigate that well, right? So and we still struggle with it. So I do think we have to be awake and, you know, thinking about, you know, being proactive. Again, that's just, sorry, small editorial on that one.
Yeah.
I'm trying to think one more. What about, well, this would probably be a whole nother webinar, but just on, you know, you talked about open and sort of open sourcing some of the ethical things, but how are we doing in terms of generally providing access to these models? So obviously there's a lot of ink been spilled about OpenAI that was set up as this open model, and then because of the needs for huge investments, basically had to shift or did shift to for-profit. Is there what's your sort of view on how open this innovation ecosystem really will be? Yeah. Sid, I don't know.
I'm happy to take that.
Yeah, go for it.
I think this is the fundamental question that we started from, which was like, how do you make money with really hard things to solve? And there's a duality around innovation, which is like you need to get started for the open source ecosystem to thrive. So when you think about it, proprietary leads to open. It's a 20-year wave. Hopefully it's shorter. But even recently, we just released, we open sourced our tokenization system, which allows you to shift GPU usage to CPU usage so that anybody can do it. So there's a fine balance. as things mature more, you have these open source libraries like Olama. It's built by one of the ex-Microsoft engineers. You have the tokenization system that Microsoft as a company released, and I think it's a thriving ecosystem where people will want to take one of the two approaches. And this goes back to my earlier comment around accountability and, like I said, suability. So if you're using an open source ecosystem, you cannot sue somebody. So there are people who want to have accountability of a minimum service level agreement, which would always want to buy a proprietary system. And the reason for that is risk mitigation and capping the risk, because they have to insure something. So if an airline company is using generative AI to I don't know, take care of customer calls or booking systems, there is a
We're
very
supposed to talk about the airline example, but okay, that's okay.
no
Just
worries.
kidding.
So that's kind of where I think both of those ecosystems will thrive, and I personally believe that the open source. So when you think about it, out of the 3 Nobel Prizes that went in physiology, Dave Baker is a champion of open source libraries for protein folding, and that is available for anybody to use. The computation cost is expensive, but it's available.
We're going to have to start wrapping up. Dean, did you want to say anything briefly on open before we conclude?
You know, the thing I just to a personal experience, I have a technology we're building called Guidance, which is essentially designed to help large language models to act more like they should. I have 5 developers working on it under me, but I have 5,000 in open source actively contributing to it. And so from our perspective, it was such a natural way to go because we could only move it so fast on our own, and with an open source community, it just moves much faster. So I'm a fan of that direction. It doesn't always make sense, but you can go so much faster in a lot of cases.
Oh, thank you for that. All right, guys, we're going to wrap up. I guess final thoughts. Both, I guess, 2 things. What's exciting you about the year ahead? As you said, things are happening so fast. Any new areas of interest that have caught you? And then finally, any final advice for your fellow INSEAD alums about seizing the opportunities from AI? Dean, I guess we'll kick off with you. Final thoughts.
Yeah, I think the thing that excites me, I really believe, and I've been saying this for a few years, but I really believe this will be the year that we do get much better at getting large AI models to output the things that we want. We all know that they're very powerful, but it takes a lot of prompting and interaction. I think there's a lot of tech now that's sitting on top of these models that's getting them to behave in more deterministic ways to better understand intent. And so for me, it's a year to watch the systems that grow up around the models, and that excites me. And advice, you know, on for other the INSEAD community is stay curious. You know, it is a crazy world and everything's changing. Use AI to follow AI. That's the other thing, is there's so much out there. You can't read everything. A lot of it is scientific papers, but ChatGPT or Bing are brilliant at summarizing the scientific papers and making them accessible to the layperson. So use AI to ingest information and make it relevant to you, and then just absorb as much as you can and stay curious, because
It's like, make this, I'm in marketing, make it relevant for me. I'm in, you know, I'm in retail, make it relevant to me. It gets good at that, right? So that's a nice coaching.
And the more you talk to it, the more it actually starts to understand what you care about. So use AI to follow AI.
And as a strategy professor, that also creates switching costs, which is really nice for value capture. Sid, last comment from you for the INSEAD community.
I think what I'm excited about is the AI hype finally coming to some kind of real world impact, like Dean said. We will see some failures, we will see some successes. I'm excited about both of those. And like Dean said, and the example you gave, this is the first time that AI can truly make things more equitable and accessible, because it can translate into languages that are not there. So excited about the low resource setting applications of AI, personally super excited. And just to close out on things for the alumnus, stay curious, take calculated risks, and know that models break models. So we are at a cusp of breaking business models. It's your job to break some of them.
All right. Thank you both. Really appreciated the conversation. Thank you for giving back and sharing your insights with the community. Take care, everyone. Thank you for tuning in. Thanks for the great questions. Really appreciate it.